So where's our star? Starts at 1 p.m. I guess this is like waiting for the Rolling Stones to start. I'm like, okay. Wow. All I want to know is when will this come to a theater near me? Fortunately, I have the book, so I don't have to wait. But anyway, welcome everyone, and thanks for attending our virtual launch of Martina Clark's wonderful new memoir. I'm Lenore Hart, editor at Northampton House Press, and I'll be your moderator. Please remember your mics must be muted during the event. Also, if you have a question for Martina, please post it in the chat dialog box. I'll be reading those later so she can answer. Your comments and questions can be seen there by everyone, of course. So if you prefer to remain anonymous, post questions as a direct message to me, Lenore Hart, and I'll read all the questions without mentioning names. Before we get started and unleash Martina, I would like to introduce David Poyer, the publisher of Northampton House Press. David's a best-selling novelist, author of almost 50 books, including a long-running series of military thrillers. The next one, Arctic Sea, is due out in late November from St. Martin's Press. As the publisher at Northampton House Press, David oversees the day-to-day operations, he reads manuscripts, and sometimes acts as editor on projects. I'll let him tell you more now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dave Poyer, and thank you for that introduction, Lenore. We started Northampton House Press 10 years ago in order to give voices to people who the large trade publishers tended to overlook in kind of different ways. Maybe they didn't feel these books had a wide appeal. Maybe they felt they needed more development. Maybe they felt who knows what. But whatever, we decided to enter the fray and try to give these voices to people who might not otherwise have them. When we got Martina's book, Over the Transom, almost 2 years ago, I was immediately struck not only by the relevance of her story, but also by the way in which she told it. She has a very distinctive voice. I enjoyed reading what she sent. It needed a little bit of development, but turning that over to Lenore, I felt very confident that two of them could work together and could produce something that would not only be eminently readable, heart-wrenching, funny, and entertaining, but that also would do some good for some people. So that's really why we took it on. And I think it is fulfilling all the promise that I thought it had. So congratulations, Martina, and I'll hand it back to Lenore.
Thanks, David. Now for the main event. Martina Clark has lived with HIV for more than half her life, 29 years and counting. She's an HIV/AIDS activist and educator who traveled the world working for the UN for 2 decades before becoming a college instructor of writing, critical reading, and global politics. She now lives and writes in Brooklyn, and My Unexpected Life is her debut work, but we both look forward to more books from you, Martina. Now it's your turn.
Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you again to everybody who is here. It is amazing to see everybody. And of course, thank you so much to Lenore, David, and Naya for pulling me out of your slush pile, publishing my book, and of course for hosting this event. Today, I am going to read just a few edited down highlights, which I hope will entice you to read the book entirely for yourself, if you haven't already, or read it again, or give it as a gift, or whatever works. So let me start cleverly at the beginning. I believe that we have much to learn from revisiting the AIDS pandemic, which is now into its 40th year. So the introduction, converging pandemics. Hey, HIV, hold my beer. When I began this memoir about the HIV pandemic, I never imagined I'd be doing the final edits during a new one, COVID-19. No one could. From New York City, the initial epicenter of the United States, no less. In fact, in the fall of 2019, immediately prior to the first known cases, I was working in the neighborhood hardest hit in the country, Corona, Queens. You can't make this stuff up. In the mid-1980s, I lived on Castro Street in the fabulously gay hub of San Francisco. At the time, it was an epicenter of a mysterious new disease, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, the pathogen that leads to AIDS. In San Francisco, all those decades ago, when I heard an ambulance in the Castro, I assumed that inside was a patient with a grim prognosis. People, gay men in particular, were dying from an invisible virus. Now, in Brooklyn, sirens are a regular soundtrack to my life. I can distinguish the honks of a fire truck from the woot woot of a squad car and the more traditional wail of an ambulance. As we were living under stay-at-home rules in the first weeks of spring 2020, however, the sirens entered my psyche in a different way. Those 35-year-old warnings haunted me day and night. With the relative quiet of the city on lockdown, each ambulance that passed sent me back to those early days on Castro Street. Unnerved by my memories of the men who died in those years, neighbors who left the hospital and never returned, the relentless funerals, I found myself reliving the grief of decades past. History was repeating itself. Again, far too many did not heed the warnings. The greatest difference, of course, is that HIV is not as easily transmitted as COVID. HIV has dealt an irreversible blow to humankind, but it started slowly and spread and continues to over decades. This newest plague, in contrast, is like a supersonic bullet train, reaching all ends of the globe in months. And still, people don't believe in science. There are now many people aging with HIV, myself included, which is fabulous. But watching the world experience such profound loss, again, is painful and frustrating.
Yes.
Will we ever learn? And then now I'm going to jump to diagnosis, 1992 in San Francisco, Blue Marlin, page 1. There will be a quiz later, so I can take good notes. It was one of those rare hot days in San Francisco. That worked out well because I was basically naked. A makeup artist from the San Francisco Ballet was painting my 29-year-old body blue. The brush tickled. It felt like a tiny dog had been licking me for hours. At least it wasn't the rough tongue of a cat. I was in a studio somewhere south of Market Street, preparing for a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz. A dozen of us were being painted, all in varying stages of nakedness, all of us, women living with HIV. This was not long after Demi Moore had appeared on that iconic cover of Vanity Fair, pregnant and naked, in 1991. Taken by Annie Leibovitz, the image had rocked the field of photography. A few of us decided it would be a powerful statement if we depicted ourselves the way we saw the virus in our bodies. The world of HIV was a small one, still is, so word of our idea quickly reached and pleased Ms. Leibovitz. Some chose to be painted to resemble their medications, some like wild animals, one with a snake and one with their hands in the shape of a heart, covering her chest. I was trying to be a blue marlin. Are you sure about the worms? The artist asked, pausing. He held a 3-inch length of brownish red yarn in one hand. You look so gorgeous, just as a fish. I mean, the blues make your eyes look like sapphires. I'm sure the worms stay. Remember the story? Okay, here come your worms. The story referred to both my distant and more recent pasts. Some 10 years prior, I spent some time crewing on sailboats. We'd been trolling a line as usual. When it tightened, we struggled to pull our catch on board. The fish turned out to be a 6-foot marlin, the kind people stuff and put on their wall. I'd never seen such a beautiful living thing up close. The massive fish shimmered like a slice of South Pacific Sea, glistening in the setting sun. Being a hospitable crew, we got the fish drunk by pouring a shot or two of rum in its mouth before delivering a swift, fatal blow to the head. We were stunned that such a magnificent fish had taken our bait. When my crewmate sliced into the marlin's belly, however, we quickly understood why. What should have been vibrant white or pink flesh was dull and graying. Inch-long worms were chewing through its innards like children playing in a maze, up and down and back and forth and hiding and reappearing as they ate their way through this dying creature's core. When I received the diagnosis that I was HIV positive, the haunting image of that infested fish and those hungry worms flooded my brain. It had been so beautiful, yet was being eaten alive from within. That was how I felt. I knew I must look perfectly normal and healthy to everyone else, but suddenly I saw HIV like evil Pac-Man, devouring my essential parts. And this is the day I received my diagnosis. Standing barefoot on the smooth terracotta tiled kitchen floor where I was house sitting, a place I called the garden house, I returned a call from my doctor's office. It was a Tuesday in May of 1992, and I was gazing out over the landscaped yard of the Zen oasis the owners had created up on a hill overlooking San Francisco. Within a few moments, my doctor came on the line. Never chatty, he jumped right in. So Martina, I have your results. You don't have mono, so that's good. I'd had a strange rash and general fatigue for months, and he'd been trying to figure out what was wrong. Oh, good. Well, that's good. I tilted a bottle of wine on the counter to read the label. I couldn't make it out though. I was so nervous. Or strep, that infection in your throat. How is it, by the way? A little better, I guess. I've been drinking lots of fluids, and maybe that's helped. I set the bottle back down on the marble counter. Good, he continued. But the thing is, your blood work was still off, and well, HIV test, yes. Well, it came back positive. I froze. At his words, every inch of my body tingled. I trembled ever so slightly. I nearly dropped the phone from my clammy hand. Could he possibly have just said what I think he said? Martina, I'm sorry. I've never had a patient before with a positive test. I'm just so sorry. I really don't even know what to say. Oh, all right then. It's okay. Thanks. I took down some information, illegible, on the notepad and hung up. My head throbbed. Thoughts were impossible to process. I stood stationary in that sleek kitchen, staring at the flat white wooden pantry door for what seemed like hours. I didn't cry or make a sound, just stared at the blank surface that reflected my new reality, as if my existence, my entire past, had just been wiped away. But ever practical, I kept going to work, kept trying to process everything. I didn't slow down. And each evening, I went back to the garden house. There, I'd sit on the master bed, a wacky arrangement surrounded by mirrors, even on the ceiling, and take my frustrations out on the pillows. I could watch myself fall apart from every possible angle. The first time I'd visited, the woman who owned the house told me they'd bought it partially furnished, with that bed and mirrors in place. Yeah, the last donor died actually in this bed, she told me, patting one of the corners of the bedspread back into place. Of AIDS, what a shame, such a nice man, according to his lover who sold us the house. I don't doubt it. This place has such amazing energy. He must have had a good soul. Never met him myself, of course. I mean, he's dead. Once the house sitting gig was over, I returned to my sister's, where I'd been staying. On my way up the drive, I stopped to collect the mail, idling next to the rickety old mailbox, always filled with spiders. I received 2 letters, one from the Peace Corps and one from a language school in Prague. I'd applied to both organizations months prior. I'd been waiting anxiously for their decisions. Both announced I'd been accepted to their respective programs. Thank God. Your French will be useful for a post in Senegal, the Peace Corps wrote. Yes, or oui. Your willingness to venture to Eastern Europe is appreciated and will serve you well in the rapidly changing homeland of Václav Havel, stated the flowery text from the language school. Excellent. Finally, something to look forward to. All I needed to do was complete and return some paperwork. Upon closer examination of those forms, I realized both jobs required a test, a negative test for HIV. No. This cannot be. At the time, then Czechoslovakia refused visas to people living with HIV, and the Peace Corps categorically refused any HIV positive volunteers. That night, I fell asleep clutching the envelopes that held 2 futures that would not be mine. This, I should note, was all before viable treatment. So without a sense of what else to do, I launched myself into advocacy and activism and started with speaking in schools. We're now on chapter 2, Finding My Voice, page 29, for those taking notes. The first time I spoke in a high school, I was scared to death. I mean, let's face it, high schoolers can be brutal. I was terrified they'd ask a question I wouldn't be able to answer. The classroom was stuffy, I was sweating. Whether it was my nerves or shitty lighting, I couldn't really see any of the students, but I could feel eyes like laser beams burning into my skin. In my mind, they were all judging me as that woman with AIDS. Although I was the speaker, the adult, in a sea of hormonal teens, who were probably actually courteous and attentive, I felt like I was the 13-year-old version of myself, trying to solve an equation on the blackboard in pre-algebra with an enormous zit between my eyebrows. Eventually, I finished. Are there any questions? At first, the group was silent. Then a tentative hand lifted, a brunette a few rows back and to my left. Excuse me, but yes, I said, trying to suppress the pond full of frogs jumping around in my throat. Do you? Yes, I squeaked, even more nervous than before. Do you know, you look just like Bridget Fonda. I smiled. Every muscle in my body relaxed. Maybe I could do this after all. I could speak to teenagers and maybe they'd hear something. Maybe I'd just be the woman who looks like Bridget Fonda and not a scary monster. That day, in front of a room of curious teens, I peeled away another layer of fear, exposed myself, and survived. On that day, I found my voice. Eventually, my path, a long one that you'll have to read to discover in the book, led me to the UN, UNAIDS and UNICEF, and eventually Department of Peace Operations, peacekeeping. But this is a quick and dirty synopsis of that work of holding the UN accountable for supporting its own staff living with HIV. So let me first describe the problem that we were trying to solve. Chapter 7, UNICEF, page 177. On the morning of our last day in a key planning meeting for our HIV in the Workplace program, Mark Sterling, then UNICEF AIDS chief, came in to say a few words of closing and thanks for the hard work we'd put in. Sadly, I'd like us to start with a moment of silence. I whimpered and covered my mouth. I'd heard rumors I'd refused to believe, that one of our regional HIV directors, whom I'd known and worked with a decade earlier, was ill. But now I knew those rumors were true. Moses died earlier today. In his last hours, he finally acknowledged that he has been living with HIV, AIDS, for some time. He was so proud and sure that as a doctor, he could manage it himself. But he never told anyone. He was embarrassed and ashamed. I struggled to remain calm as the silent crowd listened in shock. We all have blood on our hands, as I see it, Mark continued. Let's learn from this and dedicate our work to his legacy. He changed the way governments responded to this pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. Let's now change the way the UN responds to HIV in-house. We sat together in silence, my stomach twisted into a pretzel. I felt more determined than ever to make our interventions a success, not just for Moses, but for all of the other people living with HIV who didn't have the courage to speak up before it was too late. I had a chance to give voice to a population who feared to speak. And now, here's a quick look at some of the work that we undertook by addressing the bosses, the big bosses at the UN. This is next slide, please, page 205. Next slide, please, I said as I stood on the 38th floor of the United Nations Secretariat, casually trying to tug my dark gray pinstripe skirt back into place. I'd lost weight and it kept inching around. I was addressing His Excellency Kofi Annan, rest in peace, joined by his senior most leaders. Wardrobe malfunction was not what I needed at that moment. Following months, years really, of negotiations, we'd been granted a slot in the agenda, a weekly senior management meeting. We, our small interagency self-appointed task force, needed their buy-in so we could shift our plans into action. This would become the first interagency hands-on training on any topic ever mandated for all UN personnel. No small cell. If we'd succeeded, we'd be making history. I continued my presentation regarding our policy of never testing staff for HIV. And of course, that's a good thing. The UN certainly doesn't want to be seen discriminating against people living with HIV or those who've developed AIDS. In short, all hell broke loose. You'll have to read the book for all the details. But the then head of peacekeeping, shall we say, disagreed. And I disagreed with him. Normally, one does not behave like this when a mere underling. As the mayhem ensued and I defiantly stood my ground, I recalled the words of a favorite professor I'd had in college, Dr. Phoebe Portillo. In her resolute voice, she told me, "You need to always speak up for those who cannot. Not everyone will be able to go the places you go. Do not forget them. Speak not just for yourself, but for all people. Then you will be heard." The Secretary General thanked me for the lively and informative session, and I took my leave. A few days later, I received an email from the IT guy. He told me that in all the years he'd organized video conferences for the various secretaries general, he'd never seen a meeting like that. Absolute chaos, he wrote. Brilliant. Our in-house advocacy worked. And UN Cares, the United Nations Workplace Program on HIV and AIDS, was officially launched in the spring of 2008. The UN is very, very, very slow, but this was record speed by normal standards. The work was incredibly rewarding, but hard, physically, intellectually, and personally. Clearly, I would rather not have HIV, but I'm so very proud of the work we did. And I know with absolute certainty that we made a difference. Thank you.
That was a wonderful reading, Martina. It makes me want to read the book all over again. And you know how many times I've read it already. Still, I could do one more. I could do one more. So I guess now, if you don't have any other comments or anything, I'm going to move to the chat and see what questions people are leaving for you, so we can, you know, get to that.
One quick comment, if you haven't already, put in the chat where you're calling in from. 'Cause
Oh yeah, that's a good
I
idea.
feel like we're
Some people
all
have.
over.
Yeah, a few people have. We've got people from Panama and Uganda.
Honduras,
I think,
Israel.
yeah, earlier, yeah, if you scroll up, you can see that there's several people have already put it in. So if you want to put in where you're phoning in from, sort of phoning in from, we'd love to see New Jersey, Toronto, Queens. Wow, really the far reaches here. Washington, Kansas City, California. It's going so fast. Sweden, I can barely keep up. LA, Berkeley. Yeah, Israel. Gosh, you definitely got an international crowd of readers, Martina, and fans. I'm jealous. London. Yeah, my goodness. Albuquerque.
My people.
Yep. And they're all over. They're everywhere. That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm looking, trying to see if there are questions yet.
Okay.
While I'm looking, I'll tell you what, Martina, I'm going to ask you a question. Today, if you could go to a country, any country that you've been to already, that you've been to in the past, which one would it be and why would you want to go
Oh
back there,
boy.
like right now?
That is a great question with an answer that is not going to be satisfying. But one of my criteria for traveling is to go to a place I haven't already been. So for example, in 2007, I think the Department of Peacekeeping asked me to do some trainings with them. And they said either to Cyprus, beautiful, beautiful beaches, or to Afghanistan. And I'd already been to Cyprus. So of course I chose Afghanistan because who wouldn't? So I always like to go places I haven't been. But a place I'd go back to, I have secret fantasies of going to Zanzibar, to Stonestown in Zanzibar, and like renting a little place and just spending a month or two there. I think that would be amazing. It's so beautiful.
Well, let me know when you're going. I'll go with you. That sounds wonderful. We do have another question here. I'm not going to read names, as I said. So here's a question. How did writing the book change you, if at all? How does it feel to have the whole story out in the world?
Great question. Writing the book, the actual process of writing the book, I think changed me in that it really humbled me to realize just how hard it is to write a book. It's one thing to say you want to do it. It's another thing to actually do it. And all of the people that I needed to help me along the way, no less the people at Northampton House Press who helped me. Lenore did amazing edits and suggestions, and David, and shape it into what it is now. And I also think that writing it was cathartic. It felt good to get it out, each piece, and there's more pieces that never made it into the book, but it was healing so that those things couldn't eat away at me anymore. Inside, they were sort of out. And in terms of having it out in the world for everybody, it's a strange thing because I think before the launch, I was actually more nervous than I am now, because I thought, oh my goodness, it's going to be out there. Everybody can read the book. And then it launched and nobody has been like, you, why did you write that book? And maybe they still will come. I'm sure there will be haters, but everybody has had a different perspective, and many perspectives I didn't anticipate. And that has been incredibly rewarding. So it just feels like it's a book I believed in. I knew I needed to tell the story for my own sake, and to document some of the history of the AIDS response, particularly within the UN. But I think it's a story that I'm gathering is touching other people for various reasons that I had not anticipated. So it just feels great. It's a great honor. It's a great honor. That's all I can say.
Good answer. Good answer. Here's another question. It has two parts. Well, number one, I love you. Number two, when the COVID vaccine was discovered and began to be given, were you also angry, thinking it could have been for us too? What were your first thoughts when this pandemic began?
Great question. So I was in a vaccine trial for HIV in the early 90s, maybe even 92 or 3, something like that. And so I felt maybe, disappointed that that vaccine trial and the other ones that followed didn't work. But at the same time, I also felt sort of a little bit of a sense of pride, if that sounds a little strange, but I know that the work done on vaccine research for HIV played directly into the research that has produced the COVID vaccine. And so it wasn't like they just invented it overnight. I knew all of those decades of research and that I had contributed in my own teeny tiny little way helped, create the vaccine. So in that context, I did not feel angry. I also think I've just been kind of gotten so used to this that didn't occur to me. But in those early days, as I said in the introduction, I was just launched back into the mid 80s and living in San Francisco and the trauma. And it continues to make me feel like, how are we all going to live with this as the years go on? And I've become more involved with a group of long-term survivors of HIV, which has been incredibly healing for my soul. And we talk about this a lot, how, we didn't think we'd be here now. We certainly didn't think we'd be here for this pandemic. And we're both frustrated and angry that people are not heeding the words of science. And just trying to navigate living with both of these things. And it's just strange, and we're not out of it yet. So I don't think I have a more complete answer for that one.
Okay. There was a question about whether the book was available on Kindle, and yes, it is available on Kindle and all the other ebook platforms and in trade paperback. And we're thinking about an audiobook, so there. Here's another question. Lately, there's a narrative in the UN that tries to paint a picture showing that the AIDS pandemic is over. How can Martina's work here be used to pump some momentum into the UN HIV and AIDS programs?
Well, I am not certain. I think that maybe we, just need to get copies of it to all of the heads of agencies and all of the donor countries who decide where the money goes, and remind people that we are far from done with this pandemic. And also, I think it is really important to amplify the research on how COVID is impacting people with HIV, because that's a whole other thing. And I know, without too many spoilers, that as a now COVID long hauler, there are issues that are probably a little different for me than they would be for somebody who didn't have HIV. So I think we just keep putting it out and also other memoirs that have come out recently, like Peter Staley's. And there's a great book by Sarah Schulman, who talks about the history of ACT UP. If we can amplify all of these books and keep people reminded that this is not over, I think that's it. I mean, we just can never stop being activists.
I guess I would add to that. I guess I would add to that that our hope is that, by focusing on your life, not just on HIV and AIDS, that it would draw in readers who might not normally pick up a book about HIV and AIDS and read it and see that a person with HIV or AIDS is just a person with HIV or AIDS, I guess, is what I would like to say, and hope that that has an impact and draws in people who perhaps either have forgotten, about the 90s, and how bad that was, and also people who perhaps were born, more recently and didn't experience it at all and had forgotten, they don't know about it at all. So that might bring some attention to it in that way. I mean, that was my hope. So anyway, on to the next question. Let's see. Your book is a memoir of women born in the second half of a woman born in the second half of the 20th century, and describes what society expected of us and how it has treated us. Reading your experience as a woman made me sad and angry. Unfortunately, I'm not sure things have changed. So that's more a comment than a question, but if you want to address that, Martina.
I agree. So many things have not changed. Certainly for women, we are catapulted back into the dark ages with this war on women's reproductive health rights. And it's not the same, but it's similar to what we see with the civil rights movement. So many things we have just, we're going backwards again, and it's heartbreaking. So I can only just agree with that comment.
Okay. Next question. In New York, but live in Bolivia, will there be a Spanish translation? Your perspective on gender roles regarding HIV/AIDS, especially in third world. I guess that's, I guess that he's commenting about your perspective on that.
No sé.
Yeah, no sé, no lo conozco. I wish I spoke Spanish well enough to do it myself. I do not. I speak Spanish like a fluent 3-year-old, so I'm probably not the person to do it. But that would be great if we could do some translations. So the jury's out on that yet, but we would love to do translations or have them done. Okay.
Actually, we would be happy if someone volunteered to do a translation. So
yes,
if
if we knew any.
Back to the questions. Let's see. How did joining ICW help your activism? I'm thinking of you wanting to crawl into your TV in July 1992.
Joining ICW, well, first of all, joining World in Oakland, California, which is an organization of women organized to respond to life-threatening diseases. And then subsequently GNP Plus, Global Network of People with HIV, and then ICW, the International Community of Women Living with HIV. Lots of acronyms, I know. But those networks, those connections, I think shaped who I am. They allowed me to feel like I wasn't alone, and that I was in the good company of other extraordinary women and men and trans people living with HIV, and that our work meant something. So I never felt like I was out there trying to do stuff by myself. And I did often feel I was beating my head against the wall, fighting the systems of governments and the UN, but I always knew there was a whole community supporting me. And the ICW in particular, I think I just found my home, as I had with World. Because even though I never liked support groups, I guess I like to do things big. And so rather than join a support group in the town where I was living when I was diagnosed, I joined a global network support group of women from all around the world. And somehow that felt right. So it shaped me into who I am and saved my soul.
Here's another question. Are you able to reveal the support and snags from the UN community upon publishing?
I haven't had any issues because I left the UN. It's now, well, I did one more year with peacekeeping that ended in 2017. So it's been a good minute since I worked for the UN. And I don't see any conflict of interest, or I also don't feel like the book is critical in the sense of, it's unredeemable or something. It's just highlighting the fact that the UN is an enormous machine made up of human beings. And it's hard to get anything done in any organization. You have 192 bosses telling you what to do. It's that much harder. And so I don't feel like it's anybody in the UN should feel bad about it. In fact, I've seen comments from people who've read it already from the UN saying that it's just good that our stories are being told, not just as a woman or a woman with HIV, but also a woman who worked for the UN, and that our stories matter.
That's great. Are you working on a second book? You were such an engaging writer.
Well, this one has only come out 2 weeks ago. So,
yeah, so where's the next? Where's the next?
I know. This must be what it feels like when people get married, and like on the day of the reception. So when are you gonna have a baby?
Yeah. No pressure.
Yeah. So I have many books in my mind, and I have not started working on them yet. I have, lots of ideas, but I'm still also doing my day job teaching. So, but there will be more.
Good news. Let's see. Are you still making music, Martina? Speaking of being multi-talented.
I'm not, but I am happily partnered with a musician, and he does the music and I support it. And we did a launch last week at Housing Works bookstore in Manhattan, and his band played the music. And so it was a wonderful coming together of our work. I might still join in and do a little music at some point, but at this particular moment, I'm focused more on teaching and writing.
Okay. I feel blessed getting to know you better, Martina, through your book.
Thank you.
Is a comment. And another comment, be really great to talk to you and Bev and Fiona and others to put that history together of that early movement of ICW and GNP and before it is all too late.
I agree. And I see that Bev and Fiona also agree.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'll find that a little bit of it is in my book, but it's only from when I sort of started engaging with that. So there's a whole history before me. Shocking, I know. But that is definitely a history that could be better documented, because again, I think that we have, there's gazillions of things written about ACT UP, as there should be, but there's less about the international networks. So Julie and I agree.
Was there anything else you wanted to bring up that we didn't cover in the
I guess one thing that also came to my mind when talking about how can we amplify not so much my book, but I think in general, the stories of people with HIV is maybe, for those, there's some of us in academia, encourage that, that the books like make their way into public health programs, for example. I recently read on Facebook, actually, I think Rebecca's here, she saw it too, that somebody wrote a book about AIDS in Cuba, which sounds like a really amazing book and important, and it has made its way onto a reading list for a public health school. And I think that's another way to get the stories, not just of the pathogens and the science and the macrophage and all of this stuff, but also, the lives of people, especially, well, not especially, the lives of people with HIV and our perspectives, not just as patients, but as active participants in this pandemic.
Well, I guess if there are no more questions, then I'll just say thanks to everyone who logged on to our event. We hope you enjoyed it. My Unexpected Life can be purchased at any of the online sales platforms shown on screen, or you can find and order it at your favorite independent bookseller. And please remember also that reviews help authors, all authors, but we want to help Martina here especially. So the kindest way to show your appreciation to Martina is to leave a review or a rating on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, or any other platform that you belong to or go to. Thanks, everyone. Be sure to visit Northampton House Press online for more exciting fiction and nonfiction. And I will say goodbye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to see everybody.
Thanks, Martina. Bye, Martina.
Awesome.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to see everybody's faces. And just that we're all here. This is amazing. It's amazing. You're all amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina, and hi from Germany.
Thank you. And Joe and Bev and Joan. Oh my goodness. Hello.
Oh, I feel very emotional.
Me too. Me too.
See you all. Really exciting.
Yeah,
We should do this every Sunday.
absolutely. I'll just, read a paragraph and when you get your copies, you can read a paragraph. We'll just do like a group reading. Oh my goodness.
Not at 4 a.m., please.
Well, no, I tried to pick a time that would be kind of convenient for people, but that was sort of impossible to get everybody. But
I wouldn't miss it for quiz, darling.
Rebecca, you had a question about what got left out. How did I decide? It's like, I think it's like a painting. You never finish. You just have to stop. And so it was sort of what makes sense in terms of the chronological order of the book. And as you get, as I, not you, as I got more comfortable with being a writer, I also know that it's totally fine to cut things that don't work because you can use them somewhere else.
Martina, does your cat Sanga play a starring role in your book?
Fiona, she doesn't. She's, yeah, I don't think she's even in the book. I think two prior cats, Sapphire definitely, who came to live with me in Belgium. She definitely makes an appearance, and she was an extraordinary cat. She used to catch bats outside and bring them in the house and let them fly around. She thought that was hilarious. We didn't think it was so hilarious, but yeah. But no, I don't think Sanga made it into the book, but she is, she's a social media influencer, as you all know. The star of Instagram.
Hey Sanga, could you ask people to add my book to the Goodreads shelf? Can you reach out to them, please? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and thank you so much, Martina.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, Martina.
Bye. Love you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Great to see you all.